Hello, welcome to Knitter Matters, episode 26 of Knitter Matters. Thank you for taking the time to join us, whether you're watching live now or for the replay. I'm Cheryl Lampard, I'm an image consultant. My company is Style Matters International. Throughout my life, I've had two passions, sewing and knitting. And knitting in particular has been the thing that I found very creative and very therapeutic and relaxing. I used to be the owner of a yarn shop in Brighton, England too. One of the great joys of having a yarn shop is that you get to teach people how to knit, and that's exactly what Knitter Matters is all about, although via a different platform. Well, please put questions and comments in the thread below. I can't read them while we're actually doing Knitter Matters, but I'll get back to you as soon as possible afterwards. And feel free at any time during the week to post your questions. That's what the Knitter Matters page is for. And I am super excited today because today marks 6 months of Knitter Matters Facebook Lives. Who knew? You know, what started as an idea back in March, sitting on the sofa when we all started to stay safer at home or go into lockdown, working from home. What started as an idea of how to maybe occupy some of those additional hours with something creative that wasn't going to cost a fortune to do. I started with the idea of teaching people how to knit. And thanks to you, it has taken on a life of its own. I just checked some numbers this morning and we've reached over 123,000 people and over 15,000 views for our videos. And that's all thanks to you. All thanks to you. I mustn't get emotional about it, but it's so exciting. Anyway, during the week, I asked you what you wanted to see in terms of, for this special episode, what you wanted me to do again, or whether there was a new technique. And we had some really, really interesting questions. So today I'm covering questions about knitting with beads. So we're going over some buttonhole techniques, and we're talking about duplicate stitch. There's another question that was asked about resizing a pattern. And I want to start with that one first, in the sense that my thanks go to Deborah Hageman, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Deborah Hageman, who asked how you'd go about resizing a child's pattern to an adult's pattern. Now, it is a great question, Deborah, but it actually is quite involved, and it takes more time than I could put in for today. So I felt that deserved an episode of its own. So we're going to devote a whole future episode of Knitter Matters to resizing patterns. So thank you very much for that wonderful question. And keep an eye on the Knitter Matters Facebook page, because I'll be sure to let you know when we're going to do that. And I'll also put a post on it about resizing to go with that episode. I'm going to ask the camera to turn to the worktop now. I'm going to adjust my seat and then we'll get going. So the first question we're going to answer comes from Judy Trailer. Thank you very much, Judy, for asking your question about how to knit with beads, how to add beads as you knit versus stringing them and knitting along with them. So the traditional way to knit with beads is to actually, you string them on your yarn. You string several hundred beads on your yarn before you actually start the knitting. And then as you want to place the beads, you knit them in as you go. And it's a very fine technique and it works very well. But there are some occasions that you don't really want to do that. And one of the reasons that you might not want to do that is that if you string several hundred beads on your yarn, you're moving them up and down the yarn all the time. That creates friction. That creates friction even. So if you're doing that, you're going to cause pilling on your yarn. You're causing it to fluff up. With a sturdy sock yarn, something like that, it's not so much of a problem. But when you're talking about softer yarns or those with cashmere in, you're going to wear them out very quickly. So you wouldn't want to do that then. So there is another technique, and it's called placing beads. Here you can see these beads are knitted in. You can actually see these on both sides of the knitting as well. You might have to sort of poke them through a bit, but you'd probably combine this with some lace knitting as well. So you'd certainly see them there. But the way this is done is with a crochet hook. You can also do it with something called a beadle needle. I don't have one of those to show you, but it's like a long, thin steel crochet hook without the shaping. It's got a tiny hook at the end, and then it also has rubber stoppers, so you can kind of preload your beads and they won't fall off. But I'm going to go to my old crochet hook set. My grandmother gave me this when I was about 7 years old, and I've been using it ever since for really fine crochet. And I'm going to try, you want quite a fine crochet hook. I'm going to try it with this one. So what you would do, so you knit up, can you see me okay? Yeah. So you knit up to where you want the bead to be placed. So let's just go a few in here. So let's say I want my bead on my next stitch. I'm going to put one of my beads. I'm not sure what size beads these are. They were in my stash, so I'm not really sure. But what you have to remember with beads is that the bigger the number of beads, the bigger the size number, the smaller it is. And I think these are probably a 5 or 6, something like that. Anyway, your pattern will guide you on what size beads you need and how many. But I'm just using what I've got. So I've loaded this onto my crochet hook. I'm going to take my stitch off the needle, and I'm going to, okay, let's try that again. I'm going to push my bead onto my loop, onto my stitch, then I'm going to carry on knitting. Let's do that again, because I messed that up in terms of splitting my yarn, but the principle is the same. Let's carry on to another one, and then you can see. And they are quite small, so you know, the hook on this is super tiny. But you got to remember, yes, I could go with a slightly bigger hook. By the time I've got my stitch on my hook and push my bead on, if I go for a bigger hook, I'm not going to get them off. Okay, so I'm going to carry on knitting there. I love this technique. And the nice thing about this is that your bead, I'll do a couple more, your bead stays where you put it. It doesn't sort of flop around or move about. And sometimes you want them to do that. Sometimes you want, if you're doing a shawl, an airy shawl, you might want them to kind of move a bit. But these stay where you place them. They sit sort of horizontally. I'll do one more. The advantage of a needle is that you can load up several beads. So if you're moving about or taking them with you while you go out somewhere to knit, you've already got your beads loaded up on your needle. But I don't have one to show you, but the principle is the same. It's got a hook at the end. You can buy them quite easily. Okay. So that is placing beads. And if I just pull back on this row, you can see that I just did a couple of end stitches there. They're going to sit quite happily where I place them. They're not going to move around. There you go. You can see it underneath there. That's not going to go anywhere. Now, it's not suitable necessarily for every bead technique. If you want to use several beads on a stitch, if you were on a loop, to space out your knitting or sort of spread out the hem for a fringe, it's not going to work for that, obviously, but it's going to work nicely for a lot of bead knitting. And this is my preferred technique. If I knit with beads, I kind of like this one. You're going to have to do your sample swatches for what size works, but you see how effective that is? And as I said, you can also see them on the back. Sometimes if you're knitting when you string beads, you've got to decide where you want the placement in terms of, do you want to see it on back and front of the knitting? Because that's a design decision then. But this one, they sit horizontally. Sorry, vertically. Okay, so thank you, Judy, very much for that question about knitting with beads. Let's move that off the table now and put that away before I stab myself with it or lose it. And when you're talking about crochet hooks, these are called steel crochet hooks, when you get this fine, they really have to be steel because the hooks are so super fine on those. Okay. Right. Next up is buttonholes. And I want to thank Pauline Smith for this question. She asked me if I would go over some buttonhole techniques. We did buttonholes in episode 21. But Pauline said that her buttonholes always seem to be too big for her chosen button. She can't get them as snug as she'd like. And that's an interesting thing because in sewing, we tend to make the buttonhole a bit bigger than the button. In knitting, we do the opposite thing. And I was playing about with these last night and it's really quite interesting. So your button size, so these are some things that we did from previous episodes. These are just eyelet yarn over buttonholes, okay? And you can't really control the size of the buttonhole beyond 1 yarn over or 2 yarn over. So, you know, this is what size button is this? This is probably a 1/2 inch button. I have a little button size chart here. And I'll post this afterwards that you can download if you want it. It's quite handy. It's a useful one for just determining a button size. Okay, so let's go with this one. That's a much bigger buttonhole than the buttonhole. I can get that through really quite easily. And if I go to my 2 yarn over buttonhole, that's going to slip through without any problem at all. It's actually too small then for the buttonhole. When it comes to this one, which is bigger yet, I can still actually get that through the 1 yarn over buttonhole. It's a bit of a stretch, but I can do it, and I can certainly get it through there. So I could actually go up at slightly bigger sizes than you probably think. And to really show you that, on this buttonhole, which was a 2-row buttonhole that we did in episode 21, these buttonholes are all the same size. So can we get this one through? Yeah, easy peasy. Can we get this one through? This is on a shank, so it's a bit thicker and it's a bit bigger. These are all the same size. Yeah, we can get that through too, easily. This one, which is really quite a sizable button and very thick too, and you might think that's not going to go through there. But it does. Now, I probably wouldn't recommend that because you're going to stretch that buttonhole out pretty quickly. But what I am saying, it's surprising how the buttonhole is going to stretch over your button. So that's the first thing, Pauline. If the buttonholes aren't snug enough, maybe they need to be smaller than you think. And the only way to be sure about that is to just do a little buttonhole test swatch. But I've also got another buttonhole technique that I think you really might like. This is a 1-row horizontal buttonhole. It's very neat. Oh, I seem to have, okay. It sort of reinforces itself. It's pretty neat. You don't need extra reinforcing. I just went there because I realized I'd got them out of alignment. Really doesn't matter. But it's a super nice buttonhole technique. It's very neat and it's reinforced at the corner. So you don't need to do any extra work reinforcing. And I'm going to show you how to do that. I will also post the instructions after this one because it's not difficult, but you just need to pay attention to it. And I'm going to show you how that buttonhole is done. So let's get into knitting position so the camera can see me. So you're going to knit up to where you want to place your buttonhole. And again, you're going to have to practice the size. So let's say I want to start my buttonhole here. I bring the yarn to the front and I slip it purlwise. Then I take the yarn to the back. So I'm almost wrapping it. I slip the next stitch from the left-hand needle and I pass that wrapped stitch over. I'm going to do that another 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now I'm going to put that last slip stitch back onto my left-hand needle and I'm going to turn the work. I need my yarn at the back now. And I'm going to cast on 5 stitches using a cable cast on. We have done that before, but just to show you again, I'm going to go in between the first and second stitches on my left hand needle. I'm going to pull the loop through. That's 1, that's 2, that's 3, that's 4, that's 5. Now note that I've cast on 5 stitches and I only bound off 4. Okay. Now I'm going to turn my knitting again. I'm going to put the yarn at the back. I'm going to put this first stitch from my left hand needle on, and I'm going to pass that last cast on stitch to close the buttonhole. I know that's a lot. I'm going to show you again a bit further along the row. But as I say, I will post the instruction for this. It's really nice when you at first it seems, oh my goodness, but actually it's a really easy one to do. So this is where I want my buttonhole to start. I'm going to bring my yarn forward. I'm going to slip that purlwise. I'm going to take the yarn back. Then I'm going to slip this next stitch over. I'm going to slip that slip stitch over, and I'm going to do it another 3 times. 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'm going to put that stitch back on that needle. I'm going to turn my yarn. I'm going to put the yarn at the back. Okay, because I'm now going to, what am I doing? Oh, hang on. Yes, yarn at back. I need to put that back on my, that's right. I got myself in a tangle there. So I'm now going to cast on 5 stitches. That's what can happen. I was talking and thinking at the same time, and I'm not very good at doing both. So casting on 5 stitches, remember I'm casting an extra one on because I want to close that at the back, close that buttonhole at the other end. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh gosh, Cheryl. 5. Okay, I'm going to turn again, and then I'm going to put that last bound off stitch onto my right hand needle. I'm going to slip stitch that. That's that extra stitch that I cast on, remember, because I cast on 5. Then I'm going to knit. I'm just going to whiz back up the purl row so you can see what the buttonhole looks like on the right side. As I say, it's not difficult. It's just, you just have to remember where you're going and what you're doing. And that's why I wrote the instruction out for you that I will post. But it's a nice, neat buttonhole. And you can adjust how tight you want it to be to some degree. I think I tend to cast on quite firmly. But you can play about with that. And obviously you can do it with less stitches, fewer stitches. Let's get to the end here. This is called a 1-row buttonhole, which it is, although you do turn it. It's a bit like when we did the short rows. It's a turning technique. Okay. There you go. You can see. Can you see that okay? So that's, and obviously the more you knit up, the better that's going to look. Okay. So that's a 1-row buttonhole tip. It needs no reinforcing, and it's a very nice, neat buttonhole. And you can do it with a lot of different yarns. I like that one very much. So thank you, Pauline, for that question, and I hope that's a helpful buttonhole technique that you might want to try. On to our last question now, which is a question from Kerry Wilson. Kerry has seen, let me just reach across and grab some water, excuse me. Kerry has seen a lot of talk about duplicate stitch, and she wants to know what it is and when you would use it. Now, a duplicate stitch is actually a sewn stitch. I have used it very successfully to actually reinforce areas. I've even repaired some knitwear by creating a duplicate stitch on a burn or a little hole. And a really useful way of using it is if you're doing a lot of intarsia with a lot of different coloured spools across the row, and you've only got maybe 1 or 2 stitches in a completely different colour, that means another spool of yarn that you've got to weave in and twist around. Well, if it's just 1 or 2 stitches, it's probably a better idea, or it might be a better idea, to just use duplicate stitch afterwards, which is what I've done here. And I've sort of created this plaid design almost with my duplicate stitch here. And what I've done here with my duplicate stitch, I've gone every other row, but you can do it every row. And I'll show you both techniques in just 1 second. Let me get my needle. So I threaded up a yarn needle or a tapestry needle with some yarn. I've used the same weight of yarn. You want to either use the same weight or something a bit thicker, because remember, you're working over the already knitted stitches, so you want it to show up. But you could certainly use, you know, a double strand of a thinner yarn. You could use a decorative yarn. You could put a sparkly yarn in. That would really be quite nice. But I'm using the same weight of yarn and just 1 strand of it. And I've threaded up my yarn needle. So what I'm going to do is, let's see where I'm going to go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's make it consistent. I'm going to go in the bottom here. I think it's easier to start at the bottom of your design than the top. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to follow the line of my V's. So this is my V of my knit stitch. And kind of you might think, oh, I need to go in there. I'm actually going to go in here. Then I'm going to go into the same hole that I've just come out of. And because I'm doing this every other one here, I'm going to go, it'll become apparent the more further up I go. I'm going to go into the next row above. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to pull up these 2 legs, and I'm not stitching through the yarn. I'm getting my needle behind them. Okay. I'm going to go into the same hole I went into, and I'm going to come up here. Same thing again. I'll do 1 more, and then I'll start filling it in more. See, it perfectly covers the knitted stitch below. So you can see why you could cover a little error or a defect in the yarn, or even if there's a little hole or a nasty snag. 1 more. Okay. So now I've decided I need to fill this in. So now what I'm going to do is just go straight into the bar above. I'll show you again. I'm going to pull up those. Sorry, I'm going to go here. And I'm literally just going to tip my needle so it's going into the bar behind the stitch. Okay. Again. I've caught the thread there, but there we go. 1 more. And you can also jump about. So this is where it stops being so neat on the back side, but never mind. You can do this. So let's say I needed to jump across here and just do 1 stitch. I can do that. And if I want to go over there, I can do that. I can move about with, I can go wherever I want to do. So super useful technique for, you know, filling in or creating a pattern afterwards. I think it looks really good when you do every other one, especially on a design like that. But super useful if, let's say it's a flower and you just want to do the centerpiece in a different color. Easy to do it with duplicate stitch. On the back, it's really quite neat as well. These were the sort of plaid lines and I just wove in the ends there, but you know, it's pretty neat. You don't have to do it. You just weave that end in up there. You don't have to knot it or anything like that. But that is what a duplicate stitch is. You're duplicating that knitting with another yarn. And again, as I say, you could do a really pretty decorative yarn and do a really nice feature on that, or add that to some knitting. Okay, so that's our last question. Thank you very much, Kerry, for that question. Duplicate stitch, I've been longing to do that in a Knitter Matters episode, so now we know. Okay, I'm going to ask the camera to come back to me. So I hope you enjoyed today's Knitter Matters episode as much as I did. And to everybody that asked a question, we have your name in the bowl. And this is exciting, but I'm going to ask our wonderful cameraman if he would pick out a name from the bowl. Can you? It needed to go up. Can't see. Okay. Okay, who have we got? Who have we got? Who have we got?
The winner is Kerry Wilson.
Kerry Wilson. Duplicate stitch Kerry Wilson. Thank you so much, Kerry. I will be in contact with you to arrange for your $20 Mary Maxim gift card to be sent to you. So, this was exciting. So thank you everyone who put questions in for me to answer. If you didn't win today, no matter, you can still get 20% off of the highest priced item if you go to marymaxim.com, as long as you put in the promo code Cheryl. If you remember, we have this. So you can still get 20% off one item. Okay, so thank you everybody for joining me today. I hope you found that interesting. We'll be back again next Tuesday for another episode of Knitter Matters. Don't forget, all these episodes are uploaded to our page afterwards, and you can see them. If you go to the page and go to the left-hand side where it says live, you can see all the lives from previous episodes, and it's also on our YouTube channel for you to watch anytime you wish. We're on Instagram and obviously Facebook, and we do have a Ravelry page as well at the moment. So thank you for tuning in today. Thank you for watching and for being one of those 15,000 viewers and for being one of those 123,000 people that we reach. I couldn't be more happy with that after 6 months. Who knew? Look forward to seeing you again next week for another episode of Knitter Matters. Stay well, stay safe, keep calm and keep knitting. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye for now.